Hi, my name is Jenny Milkey, and this summer, as part of my educational specialist degree program and gifted in creative education at UGA, I took a class called Multicultural Gifted Education. And here is a brief synopsis of what I have learned and how I have grown over the course of the semester, and why we need to cease with the status quo. I've always collected quotes. And this one from Martin Luther King Jr. The day we see the truth and cease to speak is the day we begin to die, has haunted me for a really long time. I think from the beginning, the quote spoke to me and its truth, but I was afraid to speak. I didn't know I had a voice. I didn't know how to use that voice. I didn't know what to say. I was the kid that got in trouble for not talking in class. This summer especially, given all of the current events going on in the world, it's time to speak no matter how scared I am. In order to place where I am now, I realized I need to go back a couple of years to my first semester at Agnes Scott College. After completing a year of college at a school in Philadelphia where I felt like I was drowning in pretentiousness, and then a year of student teaching ESOL, I transferred to Agnes with the intention of becoming a teacher. The first semester I signed up for an American history class so that I could get those state teaching requirements out of the way. And I slept through my alarm clock that first day. Mortified, I quickly hopped on the computer, dropped the class, and what fit in its place was a religious studies class. Happenstance, serendipity, fate, call it happenstance, serendipity, fate, call it whatever you want, but I became a religion and social justice major, taking courses that inspired courageous conversations. The Bible and Human Rights in Atlanta, where we visited all sorts of organizations around the city, the open homeless shelters, the prison industrial open door, talked to Freedom Ways and the Georgia Prison and Jail Project. My final project was making a picture book explaining different human rights organizations, issues, and kind of heroes in Atlanta. History of slavery in the U.S., where I took all of the book, every single book in the Cobb County Public Library system that came up when I searched for slavery, Abraham Lincoln, or the Civil War, and looked at the messages our children are getting from the books that they have available to them. Violence, Genocide, and Justice in Contemporary Africa. Somehow talking about race, a continent away, made it a little bit easier. It wasn't quite right here, although my grandmother was exiled from South Africa when she was 10, because her mother was very active in the African National Congress. They were South African of Indian descent, which meant that they were higher up in the kind of class hierarchy than the Bantu or the colored people, what they called the classes, but still beneath the white or the Afrikaners. And so my grandmother's mother was imprisoned and fought with the ANC for justice, and so they were exiled and returned only in 1994 to cast the ballot for Mandela's first election, or their first ballot ever to elect Mandela as president. And then race, class, and gender, amongst so many other courses. In the Bible and Human Rights in Atlanta, one of the sites that we visited was the Open Door community, which is now it has now closed down as a homeless shelter for men. But I worked there in their foot clinic for a while, hearing stories for these men who spend all day, every day on their feet in shoes that don't fit. And so we would give them, half an hour of reprieve to sit and have their feet taken care of, and they would leave with 2 pairs of socks. Murphy Davis, who um, co-founded the Open Door community, said, I really believe that anyone, especially of the middle or upper class, who is not serving her oppressed neighbor, is serving the status quo. As long as our neighbors are being oppressed among us, and they are, and we are not serving them, then we are serving those who benefit because of our neighbor's oppression. So while these conversations were happening around me, I didn't know how to talk. I listened intently. I asked questions. But as Singleton and Hayes describe as being a common response to discussion of racial inequality in particular, I withdrew into silence, afraid of saying something that might come across as offensive, ignorant, racist, oppressive. And in doing so, I perpetuated the problem. So this class this semester, in our first meeting, Dr. Grantham taught us the Cabbage Patch dance, which was something that had something to do with our movement of shoulders. And so I totally don't have it down anymore. But I spent a lot of the semester reflecting on dance, both like literally and figuratively, because the Cabbage Patch took me back to that summer in college where a group of kids tried to teach me the Stinky Leg and the Soldier Boy and Superman and all these dances I did not get. So it was a summer that I lived in Peoplestown and worked at a faith-based community center and 3 days a week with a middle school arts program. Peoplestown, the edge of Peoplestown started 4 or 5 blocks south of Turner Field, which at the time was Atlanta Braves baseball team, where the Atlanta Braves baseball team played all their home games. And gentrification hadn't yet reached Peoplestown. Reaching the nearest supermarket took 2 bus changes. Domino's wouldn't deliver. The local playground had been constructed on a toxic waste dump. And on a hot summer day, a young girl caught on fire as the friction of her skirt on the slide and ignited flames. Oh, and it was a zip code with the highest rate of birth-addicted babies in the state. But Peoplestown and Emmaus House were just such an incredible community. The first Habitat for Humanity house built in Atlanta is just down the street. So 3 of the days of the week, I helped co-facilitated a free middle school arts program for the kids in the neighborhood. And on Wednesdays, I taught them ballet. They taught me the Stinky Leg in return. So here, my world of privilege showed up in very different ways than I had ever imagined or could have predicted. Put it bluntly, I was the anorexic classical ballet dancer in a world of hip-hop and chicken wings. I had the luxury of channeling my own fears and insecurities into not eating. And the even bigger discord was that I had the luxury of health insurance, medical care, and therapy. My privilege was what it was. Wallowing in shame about it now, though, makes me just as implicated in the divisive inequalities that exist in our community, just as much as in someone enforcing segregation or keeping the prison industrial complex in action for economic benefits. It took me so many years to find that I had a voice, much less that I could speak, though. So as a teacher, what I want my students to know is that they have a voice, no matter how young. And so to channel the National Association of Gifted Children's recent statement on stance on racism, see me, understand me, teach me, and challenge me. It's the core of what I want my classroom to be. Especially this semester as I have delved more deeply into the linguistic discrimination that has been systemically embedded in American culture since the very beginning. I have come to have a greater appreciation of languages like dance and food that are communicated outside of spoken or written words. Dance and food often invite cultural sharing at a deeper level and much faster pace than the spoken language. Children dance and eat before they develop conversational skills. So, and a lot of time, spoken language brings so many more layers of power to unpack. So, even though the English dictionary or in an English thesaurus, tolerance and acceptance are listed as synonyms and are used to mean similar ideas in everyday colloquial conversation. I almost think that the divide between the two of them is greater than the divide between linguicism and racism. So I think one of the most profound blockades to the reality of equity in the US is the commonplace American interchangeability of these two terms. So, and if, as Wiley suggests, ethno-linguistic superdiversity is an ideal of ours, we need to teach and model way beyond acceptance. We need pluralism. And if the majority of pluralism still consider tolerance and acceptance as interchangeable, we're speaking entirely separate languages. It's no wonder there's conflict. I first encountered the word pluralism in the context of religious studies. I'd never heard it before, and outside of academic theology and some equity-focused realms of higher education, I find that very few people have any idea what it means. And yet we're to become an upstander, to use Dr. Grantham's terms, rather than a bystander, where do we start the conversation? My cousin's grandfather, Cecil Alexander, in the middle here, joined forces with John Lewis back in 1982 to form the Atlanta Jewish Black Coalition. They started conversations. How have we gotten very far? I've started having some of these conversations about the terms, you see here, with my students. This summer, I'm working with a rising third grader who we read a biography of Mandela, and she was able to compare Mandela to different Black civil rights activists and Martin Luther King. But we found female civil rights activists to inspire her. The fact that she can make those connections at age 8 offers me so much hope for the future. And one of the organizations that I am reconnecting with, the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing, which is right here in Atlanta. They offer dismantling racism trainings, which were required. They were a graduation requirement at the seminary I attended, and are required of all clergy and staff in the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta, and actually the Episcopal Church in the U.S. all over. Their trainings are free and and Zoom ones are coming up all of the fall semester. The other area I feel particularly called to and thinking about inequities in our education system, and particularly in gifted education, is making mental health accessible. So, especially with all of this trauma going on, mental health first aid is even more crucial. These trainings are also offered for free. My other goal for this upcoming year, while I don't yet have a teaching position, is to do the certified trauma practitioner, trauma-informed resilient school training from Star Commonwealth. That's what we need. And in the words of Elie Wiesel, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. I'm taking that call. Thank you, Dr. Grantham. Thank you, this class.